So I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to tell you just a quick little history of like what we've got going on in terms of oxalic acid in the United States. And then we'll jump in kind of and make this as applicable to you as possible as I kind of share with you some of the research that I've been doing the last few years in relation to this, and we'll see if we can make this helpful. So we have been battling, as you know, Varroa in the United States since 1988, right? So it's like basically my entire life, we have had Varroa and had to do something about it. And it wasn't until like 2015 that oxalic acid was an option for us legally, right? There was applied for an emergency use permit in 2015, and that's when it started kind of really ramping up at that time. But people had been using oxalic acid for decades before. And so we do have, a fair bit of knowledge and information about it, but right now it wasn't, when it was applied as an emergency use permit, a lot of people, there wasn't a vendor, there wasn't like a specific registered product. People were going out and buying oxalic acid, but they were seeing lots of issues with that, and lots of, poor efficacy, and so it kind of took a little bit of time before, we kind of caught back up. The first product that was registered and for use in the U.S. was Apabioxal, and I'm going to share some of the research we did there kind of early on. But now we have actually two other products in the U.S. One's called EasyOx. It's the same. I mean, it's very similar, but they have come in like pre-formulated tablets that are 1 gram. That's an important number that we'll talk about in a minute. And then we also have a product called Viroxan, which is actually very similar to aloe and cap. That we'll talk about in a minute too. So these are the products. Oxalic acid is good and bad for a couple. There's pros and cons to everything, right? I get asked this all the time. They're like, "What's next, Cameron? What's our silver bullet? What are we gonna get that's just gonna fix this?" And I got to tell you, I don't think there's a silver bullet. It's gonna be a management. It's gonna be behaviors. There's gonna be things that we need to do to manage Varroa, but there's not going to be something probably that's just going to wipe this out, right? So we have these different tools to kind of help us manage with oxalic acid, but one of the pros of this is that it is kind of a quick burst of chemical that will drop a lot of mites, but some of the issue is that it doesn't tend to last for very long. Now, we'll talk a little bit about extended release applications and how we've tried to, researchers have tried to improve upon that. But one of the beauties of it as well is because it is a natural compound, is that oxalic acid is water soluble. It breaks down rather quickly. So that's a good and a bad thing. Because it breaks down rather quickly, that we don't really see it build up inside the hive. We don't really see resistance from mites. Even though we have used it for decades in the U.S., there's not a lot of resistance issues, right? Because of how it breaks down, and because of its nature, we can also use it while honey supers are on. So that's important for us, but it's especially important for you in your environment where you have kind of very finicky honey flows, right? Like that can pop on very quickly, and you might not always be able to plan, and you need to be able to move these quickly to go catch those flows. So having something that can be applied while honey supers are in place is important. So I'm going to share with you kind of what I know after some conversations and talking with others about what the situation here is currently, and the AUBIC, Australian Honeybee Industry Council, has this neat table that kind of gives you the information of which treatments have been approved and what is available to you, right? And in terms of oxalic acid, you have Apabioxal, which is registered via an emergency use permit, and there's a couple different ways to apply that, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then you have aloe and cap, which is still unregistered, but the application, I've heard from people, is progressing, and so hopefully this is an option for you soon. So let's talk a little bit about different ways that you can apply OA, and through this, at least through Apabioxal. The label will talk about dribbling, which has been like the most historical use of it, is mixing it into a sugar syrup that you are then trickling onto the bodies of the bees. And then you have something vaporizing, which means you are basically heating that and you are turning it into a gas. Now, some of you in here are going to look at me and be like, Cameron, is not vapor, like it's not really vapor, right? Like it's a sublimation, right? It's because you're taking something from a solid straight to a gas. Okay, so that I was calling it sublimation for a long time, and then I had some chemists sit down and stop me and were like, no, Cameron, this is vaporization. And I don't know who to believe anymore, to be frank with you. But I'm going to say vaporizing until somebody can really give me a good reason. The reason that this chemist gave me was that it is actually vaporization, is because if we were using true, pure OA, it would be sublimation because we would be heating it, taking it from a solid to a gas. But we're not using pure OA. If you look at the label, we're using oxalic acid dihydrate, which means there's some water molecule in there that will help. It does liquefy before it turns to gas. So it's happening very rapidly, but it's technically vaporizing. Okay. You can hate me afterwards if you want to. But that some people I've learned feel very strongly about this. But I'm going to call it vaporizing throughout the rest of this talk. So now some of the cons of this, right, is because it is water soluble, that means it's not going to penetrate that wax. That's good and bad, right? It's not building up in the wax, but it's not penetrating those brood cappings as well. So it's this just based on that alone, you can say that like this is not going to be a particularly effective treatment when you have lots of capped brood, at least unless you requires like multiple applications. So because it's water soluble, short lasting, but as I mentioned already, there's no reports of mite resistance to date. Now, this is something that I also need you to look at me for a second. I want to make sure this like really sinks in. There is no reports of oxalic acid resistance. Does that mean that they cannot become resistant? No, it does not, right? They can become resistant if we were all to just like all in 100%. Everybody's just using OA. I promise you, they will find a way for them to become resistant, right? So we just need to be smart about this. This is, I gave a talk at the earlier at the crop pollinators conference earlier this week, and a lot of my like message was like, let's not make the same mistakes that we've made in the United States, where we get hung up on one thing and we use it till it's gone, right? So let's be smart and do our best to rotate. Okay, so kind of speaking to that point, there are options for extended release. Now, I want to be careful how I'm talking about this, because there are registered products such as Aloe Cap, right, or that's going through the registration here, registration process here, and then Viroxan is what we have in the U.S. That's kind of the equivalent of this. And these are extended release products that are formulated to kind of be kind of a slow release. Now, again, this is good and bad. Because the good means that, yeah, maybe you are targeting, if you're getting OA to hang out longer inside the hive, then maybe there's more chance for it to continue to drop mites instead of these like quick bursts of chemical that drop and then disappear. But the con of that is if you're going to develop resistance, it's going to be probably because everybody's using an extended release that's just hanging around for a long time, right? So it's good and bad. We can't really get hung up on one thing for a super long time. Now, the second point that I want to make here is that with a lot of these extended release treatments, there's a lot of information. People are making all sorts of things online. I will just tell you from my professional opinion, I really think that's a bad idea, right? I really think this is something that, one, is not great to concoct in your own home kitchen, on your own home stove. Like oxalic acid, just because it is a natural compound does not necessarily mean it's safe for you. I've seen burns. I've seen people like really, make bad mistakes. I've gone to a lot of beekeepers' colonies when they get dead outs and they're freaking out because they've just killed a lot of bees in their apiary from their own homemade concoction. So I'm not a fan of that. And we have tried a few different homemade recipes just because that's what a lot of beekeepers in the U.S. are doing, and so we're trying to see how well it works, and I'll have some data on that a little bit later, but some of them can work all right, some of them honestly don't, and they're really not worth it. So I'll strongly encourage you to stick with the registered products and follow the label. Not just the label is the law, which is important, but two, the label actually represents research, and that's important for their protection for you as the applicators and for your bees. So to that note, before we jump into all this research, I wanted to just kind of one last pitch for safety here. You do have to protect yourself. Again, the dose makes the poison. Oxalic acid is in a lot of the food that we eat, right? So people kind of are like, well, that's not a big deal, but it's concentrated. When you concentrate something, right, then all of a sudden it can be an issue. I can tell you with vaporizing especially, I've accidentally pulled that mask off a little too early and breathed that in, and you'll recognize right away that is not supposed to be inside your lungs, right? It's very uncomfortable. So you have to be careful. Using good devices is important too, and wearing eye protection is incredibly important. I had a student who, thank goodness, was wearing her proper PPE, but was using a vaporizer that she didn't have the lid all the way, and it popped right in her face, and all the molten oxalic acid was all over her goggles. Thankfully, she was wearing her eye protection, right? But like, I would probably not be standing here in front of you because I'd still be doing paperwork if I just made a student go blind, right? So like, take care of yourself, wear proper protection, and it can really be a great product. I'm not trying to scare anybody. I'm just trying to say, it can really work well if you follow things correctly. All right, whoops, I double clicked. Okay, so what I want to do for the next few minutes, during my talk, I want to kind of take you through this journey of oxalic acid research as like I have done it, and kind of what we know that others have done, at least in the U.S., related to OA work. So one of the first projects that I was doing as part of my PhD is, I'm interested in Varroa research and very practical solutions that are helpful for beekeepers. And I was meeting with we had some Italian researchers that were visiting our lab in Florida, and I was talking to them a lot about oxalic acid because this was relatively new in the U.S., or at least it had recently become recently registered. And so I was asking them questions about what they were doing, and this Italian researcher was telling me, well, a lot of beekeepers there will force a brood break, right, by caging the queen for a period of time, even up to like 3 weeks or so, of caging the queen so that there is no brood inside that colony, and then they're applying a dose of oxalic acid, and the idea is in one fell swoop, you're going to knock down all the mites, because if there's no brood, where are all the mites? They're on the bodies of the bees, right? They're accessible, they're exposed. And so the idea is just one big hit and you can knock all these mites down. So we wanted to kind of test this method, but we wanted to do it with OA vapor. And so I'll explain this research project we did, and kind of throughout the rest of my talks, I'm going to show you some different papers here, and I've got some QR codes. If you're interested in like looking up the papers yourself and you want to read that, feel free to snap some pictures. At the very end, I'm going to put up my email address, and if you have questions, or if you want the paper, I can send it to you, or maybe I'll send it to Lindsay and you can give it out to everybody, so I don't have a million emails. But either way, I'm happy to do that and happy to give some information out. Okay, so this is one of the projects that we did, and very simply, we kind of set this up as like a full factorial design, meaning like we were trying to cover all the different scenarios. So look how I've got this set up. We either have groups 1, 2, and 3 that we applied that brood break by forcing the queens, or caging the queen for about 3 weeks. And then we had groups like 4, 5, and 6 where we didn't cage the queen. Then if you kind of go look at like a column level, then we've got this idea where we applied oxalic acid vapor either one time, because again, theoretically, that's all you would need. If you've got a brood break, one application should be enough to just knock all those mites. But then there's another group of people that are like, well, instead of caging the queen, what if you just applied once a week for 3 weeks? You'd still get most of those mites as they are coming out and emerging, because the mites will hang out on the bodies of the bees for a few days before they go back into the cells to start their reproduction again, right? And so we're comparing one application with 3 applications, and then we've got our control groups where we have no applications. So we had about 10 colonies per group, so that's about 60 colonies right there. And then we had a seventh group where we had like kind of our industry standard, which is using Apivar. So we have 70 colonies total represented. So I'm going to show you this data, and I'm taking a lot of information and I'm trying to boil it down into like maybe the simplest way to talk about this. And the simplest way to show you this is to just show you the mite survival that we had, or sorry, the colony survival that we had over this period of time. So notice, you can already see right away that we had some issues. So let's start at the very corner here where you see that CQ, that means cage queen. That group at the very end where we had only 10%, so like one colony out of our 10 that survived for this like 4-month study. And that's when we just applied that brood break, but we didn't give them anything else, right? And that's a pretty harsh treatment on its own. I mean, think about it. If you're caging your queen for 3 weeks, that's a lot of bees, right? That is lost, right? And so with the other pressures that we have, and you have as well, like small hive beetles and things, when you reduce the colony's size and strength that much, it's going to be tough on them. Okay, let's keep going. And what you'll notice is a pattern for everything else. When we applied that brood break and we only applied one application of our OA, we didn't have very good control. When we started doing 3 applications, we started having more survival. But really kind of the kicker here at the very end is like you see Amitraz, they all survived, or that's our Apivar treatment, all of them survived, and they looked pretty healthy at the end of this 4-month period. A couple of caveats I need to say about this. This research was done in 2016. It's been a little while since that, but I'm giving you my OA journey here. And so right now, when we are seeing some issues in the United States with Amitraz resistance, because this was so effective for such a long time Americans were only using Amitraz, now it's not so effective for us anymore. But at the time, it was working really well. But here's what kind of was like the real shocker is like our control group where we did nothing versus our group where we applied oxalic acid 3 applications, they were still the same, right? Like we weren't getting any benefit. So we kind of had to sit back, and this was during my PhD, so I'm like trying to just finish because I want to get a job and start making some money. So, and I was just kind of like, oh, that sucks. Well, on to the next project. My advisor, Jamie, is like, no, like we got to figure this out. Like, why did this not work? Like let's think through this. What's really not working here? And so the best that we could do is we start digging around and we're thinking, looking at some of the literature from Europe, and we're like, well, I guess our dose that we're using, which is the current legal dose that's on our label in the United States, is just 1 gram of OA per brood chamber. And we're like, well, that seems kind of low, because I would go to other beekeepers and I'm like showing them this data, and they're like, well, Cameron, we know that it works. And I'm like, well, I mean, we've got some data, like it just didn't work. And they're like, well, 1 gram doesn't work. And so it's like, okay, well, let's dig into this a little bit and let's try to like figure out like what does work. So we started to look kind of into it further to figure out like what dose works. Now, a few years after this, there was another group out of UGA, and Lewis was part of this team and he's here and he'll speak to us later today. But his group also found that they applied 1 gram of OA 7 times. So like for 7 applications every 5 days, and they still didn't see an effect, right? So we were kind of in consensus of like, yeah, this doesn't really work at the current labeled rate. We'll talk about issues related to that in a minute. So then we decided to take this next step and like, okay, well, let's figure out what does work and what is going to be helpful for varroa control. And the way that we set up this experiment was pretty similar to the one before, but this time we kind of scaled back. We weren't going to mess with brood breaks for the time being. We were just going to have these different doses where we either have the 1 gram, which was the current legal dose, 2 grams of OA, or 4 grams. And we thought like 4 grams, man, that's a lot, right? Like we're going to melt some bees, but we wanted to be able to see what was going to be the difference here. And then we have our control group. So now we have 40 colonies, and we're instead this time of caging the queen, like I said, we're going to just apply OA vapor once a week for 3 weeks. And then these little varroa mites here are kind of our indicator of times that we collected and did alcohol washes to kind of measure our mite infestation level over this period of time. And so here's essentially what we saw. Now, just hang with me for a second. We'll walk through this together. So what we're looking at here is our mite infestation levels. And let's start with this blue line here, because this blue line is our control group. So notice what happens over this period of about 1 month. What does our control group do? When you don't do anything, what happens? Our varroa populations increase, right? That's the way it's going to work. Your varroas are going to continue to grow. So you see that line just continues to increase up. But the rest of them kind of have a downward trend. So now, this orange line here is our 1 gram dose. So notice how it is declining, but it's not declining very much. And so statistically, when you're comparing the differences between our control group and our 1 gram group, there's actually no difference. We can't say that there's a significant enough difference to notice. But when we do 2 grams, when we doubled it at 2 grams, that's this green line here, we actually do start to see some separation from the control group, and we can say, okay, now we are effectively reducing varroa more than the control. Well, this yellow line here is our 4 gram dose. And this is where we thought, like, well, maybe we're going to really knock some bees back, but at least it's very linear. The more OA that we were putting in, the more mites that we were killing. So our 4 gram dose was significantly different than the others. So now what happened to the bees when we were applying all these treatments? So this is a little hard to see, and I'll just kind of explain it to you what we're seeing. But we measured different measurements related to colony strength, including like an estimation of the number of bees, the number of brood cells, the amount of honey cells, and pollen cells. And basically what we saw was that there were no differences between any of the groups, right? So even at the 4 gram level, we weren't seeing any noticeable reduction in bees and brood. Now notice how some of the bees and brood line, for instance, are on a downward trend. But that's because we were doing this work as we were kind of entering autumn, and our queens were slowing down anyway. So there's kind of a natural reduction in bees and brood. But we're not really seeing any like major reduction there. So that kind of led us to be like, okay, well, we're not using enough OA. I mean, it can work, right? But we're not applying enough to do that. Now, there's been some big headaches in the U.S., and I took these data, and I went to the company that owns Apiarists Bioxychemicals, Leif, and I was like, hey, I think you guys should consider, revising the label in the United States so that we can kind of use this product more effectively. And they were like, Karen Jack, we love you, man. Like, you're the oxalic acid man now. And because for them, I mean, obviously it's a good thing you're going to buy more product if they say we need to do more, right? So they were happy with that. But then here's the thing and in the United States anyways, and I have no reason to believe it wouldn't also be difficult here in Australia, but it's been so difficult. I mean, we've had this work that we've had for about 5 years. We've been trying to amend the label in the U.S., and it's been such a slow process that I'm finding out is that it is easier to register a new product than it is to go in and amend a label of another product. So this has become a little bit tricky for us and difficult. And so, because I said at the beginning, and I truly do believe this, is that the label does represent research and the label is the law. And I don't want anybody to like leave and be like, well, Cameron Jack said 4 grams, but like, so we should be using 4 grams. Like, no, what we need to do is amend these labels and get it so that we have something that actually works. And fortunately for you, your label is different than our label in the U.S. So you have, it's 2.3 grams, I believe, was what's on that label. So you have something that is in that range of a product that actually works. Now, we've just been talking about vapor for the last couple of projects, right? Because that's where we were at in the U.S. was we wanted to test the vapor. But this is where I get a lot of the questions. It's like, well, what's better? Should I just be using the dribble or should I be using the vapor? And then to make it even more complicated, there's a lot of other things that beekeepers in the U.S. have been using and trying to make OA work better inside their hives, like either through like extended release, kind of through a homemade application, or they were using insect foggers, which is So crazy. Okay. I don't know if you've ever used this or if you've seen this before, right? Like an insect fogger is often used for like mosquito control where they're mixing it OA into ethanol and then like it creates this big plume of smoke. And like, I imagine as an applicator, you feel pretty good. You're like, oh yeah, like watch out bugs, right? Like, but can you imagine what could go wrong? Like it's on like a little propane torch. Then you're mixing in this like 100% proof ethanol in there to do it. It's like, it's just a disaster waiting to happen. And so, of course, I had some undergrads research this. And while I stood back, I'm like, good luck. You'll probably be fine. Sign this paper. Anyways, that's one of our questions that we wanted to get out is like, which of these applications are actually going to work the best? And then as we were kind of struggling with this product label and apabioxals coming back to us, like, well, what should we change? I'm like, well, I'm looking at the label. I'm like, there's a lot of ambiguity here of like, what am I supposed to do? Says it may damage brood, but how much does it damage brood? Says you can apply multiple treatments several days apart, but like, what does that, what's several mean? Several can mean anything. It's just all about like scale. So this was kind of like our question. So we recently published this. This is a paper that we just completed a couple, I guess about a year and a half ago or so now, where we tried to get at some of these two different questions. And in this experiment, we tested either OA vapor, OA dribble. Now this OA dribble is at 3%. That is our current legal limit in the United States. And I believe it's very similar to what you have here in Australia as well. And then we tested an OA fogger solution, which means I was up on YouTube for hours just watching a bunch of videos of people saying like how they were mixing it and then being like taking notes. I'm like, all right, this is kind of like the consensus of what everybody's doing online. And so those were our 4 different treatments there. And we applied these treatments kind of once a week for 3 weeks. And we were taking lots of samples. And we were also measuring colony strength, kind of pre and post, just kind of getting an idea of what kind of differences we might see. Now notice, I don't have an extended release product as part of this treatment. That's because I was doing a different study, which I'll tell you about in a second. Okay, so let me just walk you through this. And really, you don't need to get too close like into the nitty gritty because I know this is hard to see in the back. But really what I want you to look at is like the slopes of these lines, whether they're inclining or declining. So in this first, like group A over here on your left is going to be the number of bees that we saw. So from pre-treatment to post-treatment over this period of about 1 month, we had one group that red line that's just increasing like crazy. They really got strong quickly, and that was our vaporizer group where we just applied the OA vapor. And we applied the OA vapor at 4 grams. So I have a little bit of diplomatic immunity, I guess I'll say, is like at the university level where I can like work with the researchers and I can kind of, I can go against the label, but to provide some data for label changes. Anyways, so most everything is growing because we were applying this in the spring. And so we expect to see all of our bees, all of our colonies start to grow to some degree. So that's why all of them are growing. But we had one group, the vaporizer group, that really got strong very quickly. Then this next one, this middle piece, is our brood. So same thing. We notice how all the brood is kind of growing. But there was 2 groups that grew significantly better, and that was the vaporizer and the OA dribble groups. Definitely outperformed the control and the fogger. But now look at this. This last figure on the right here is our mite infestation level. So now this is where you can really see some differences. Notice how there are 2 groups that are slowly trending up and 2 that are going down sharply. So the vaporizer and the OA dribble both kind of equally controlled and reduced our mite infestation levels. And they did so at the same degree versus our OA fogger and our control group, where those mites continue to grow. So the OA fogger essentially did nothing. And if we sat down and we tried to back calculate how much oxalic acid was actually getting in to those hives when we were using that, because when you're using the fogger, it's like an insane cloud, and it looks like there must be something crazy happening in there. But when you're doing the math, you're really only getting like less than 1 gram of OA that's actually making it in. And so it's really not as effective as really the OA dribble or or the fogger. So from these data, we saw that the current labeled rate of the OA dribble is very effective in the U.S. And so until we can get our label changed in the United States, I'm suggesting to the American beekeepers to use the OA dribble over the fogger. However, I really like the fogger. I think it's quick and it's a good application and it can work really well. And we see it really helped our bees and brood. However, until we can get our label changed, that's where I'm at right now with that. But I think you have an opportunity with 2.3 grams available for vapor or the dribble. I think you have two decent options for you related to that. Now, okay, the second part of our question was how often should I be applying this, right? And how many days apart? So we set this up where we were doing OA at 4 grams. Where we were either applying them every 3 days, like 3 days apart, every 5 days, or every 7 days. And we made this so they all kind of ended at the same day. So we would have had to start our every 7-day treatment group earlier than our every 3-day group, right? Does that make sense? They all kind of ended at the same time. And here's what we found there. So again, don't worry. We're going to walk through this. So this group A right here, this figure where we're seeing these different lines is basically our 72-hour mite fall. So we were putting sticky boards underneath all these colonies, and after we would do a round of OA vapor application, we would slide in these sticky boards and then just count the number of mites that fell over the next 3 days. And what you'll notice, let's look at that blue line that's on the bottom here. That is our control group. And this is one reason that I don't feel that mite fall is, and I've got other data to support this, not just this, but mite fall is not a very reliable indicator for like monitoring Varroa populations. I'm not against it. I think it can work, especially if you were in your situation where you're looking for Varroa and you don't have Varroa. Or you're not sure if you have Varroa, and then so if you put in like a strip, and you were to watch mite fall, then I can think that could be useful. But on its own, mite fall is not very reliable because even when you have lots of mites, it doesn't necessarily show up as like more mites on the bottom unless you're applying some sort of treatment. Okay, now you can see for application 1, we've got our green group here, which is our 3-day intervals. We've got this red group that's every 7 day, and then we've got this black group that's every 5 days. Now, they were all receiving their first round. I mean, they were all receiving every time 4 grams of OA. So every time we applied this, yes, it worked. There's a bunch of mites that dropped. But what you notice is when we start to see some real differences in terms of our intervals later on. So by the second application, when we waited only 3 days, we hardly see any more drop than we do in our control group. They're not statistically different. They're very similar. Every 5 days, it's a little bit better, but not significantly different. But our 7-day group, we still dropped a lot of mites. And then go to the next round, third application. It's when we waited 7 days, we dropped significantly more mites than when we waited every 3 days or something, right? So by the end, after that 4th application, they were all about the same. We had really cleaned up some colonies. We had dropped a lot of mites. So one way we can measure that, right, is through our mite infestation, through our alcohol washes, is this other figure on the right, where, again, you can just kind of look at the slope of the lines and see the story. This blue line here is our control group. Did exactly what we would expect it to do. It increased over this month period. But then let's look at when we waited every 3 days, in those 3-day intervals, we see our slope is trending down, but it's not a really sharp drop. We definitely reduced mites, but we didn't reduce a lot of mites. If you look at the black line, it's every 5 days, we had a really sharp drop. So look at this number. It's kind of ridiculous, but I want to show you this is kind of like the situation that we were in the U.S., right, where our mite numbers were at the beginning, they were averaging above 10 mites per 100 bees. That's bad. That means a lot of them were like on the verge of collapse and death, right? But we really did drop a lot of mites when we applied every every 5 days, we were applying 4 grams, we reduced a lot of mites and we saved those colonies. And that red line is every 7 days. So 5 to 7 days really did do much better than every 3 days. So let's think about why that would be for a second, right? Just knowing what we know about Varroa biology is when that mite goes down into that cell, and then she lays her eggs, they reproduce, right? And then the female foundresses, or the female will emerge out when that bee emerges out. But they have to spend time on the bodies of the bees, right? For about 3 to 7 days, right? Like, so somewhere within that time, they need to be on adults before they will go back down and continue that reproduction. So if we're applying OA every 3 days, then we're dropping some mites, but you're not allowing enough time for the mites to emerge out before you're applying, another round. So you're really not getting bang for your buck, is like the way I would say, right? It's like you're just not getting a good drop when you are applying it so regularly. I want to tell you just a really quick story. It's kind of horrifying, actually. But I was at a meeting, and this was in a different country, and a beekeeper came up to me, and they were like, because I'm the oxalic acid man, they're like, Dr. Jack, I just want to tell you, because of your research, I have started treating with OA, 3 grams of OA vapor every single day. And I was like, don't tell people that. Like, I did not say that, right? You are a witness. Like, I never said that. Don't treat every single day. In fact, this is the opposite. This data is like showing, no, you're probably like wasting your time, right? Like, you're wasting your money because like you need time out. But then what do you think my next question was? It's like, well, how do they look? Right? Like, what do your bees look like? And she's like, they look great. I'm like, okay, well, still don't do that. Like, that's not a good idea. But so I hope that's not the message that anybody's like leaving here with, is that Cameron Jack said you should do this every day, because I don't think that's what you should be doing. So the last thing is like, so what about OA extended release? Because this is what's on a lot of people's mind, and this is what a lot of people are doing online, and they're finding these recipes and they're using them. And so we took a recipe that we saw from Randy Oliver, and we had tried it. And this was a part of the study, which is actually what my presentation is on tomorrow. So I'm not going to steal too much of my own thunder here. I'm going to save a lot of like the work that this research for tomorrow, where we're talking about seasonal efficacy of these different treatments, where we applied different like 8 different chemical treatments at different seasons, and one of them was this OA extended release. So I'm only going to share with you like a snippet of the extended release, because we're talking about OA. So the way we break it down is we had these different groups where we applied it in autumn, winter, spring, or summer. And what we're looking at here are these numbers related to our Varroa population change in a short period of time. Don't worry about the numbers so much. We're going to go through this tomorrow. So yeah, you don't need to panic. I just want to give you a little bit of snippet. It's like in the fall and in the winter, when we use this OA extended release, like this kind of like homemade version, our mites grew by 883% during the fall, which is not good, right? They grew by 156% in the winter. They decreased by about 12% in the spring and about 2% in the summer. So what does that tell you? It's not a very effective treatment, right? At least this particular recipe that we were using is not particularly effective. So, well, that should not be confused with necessarily with like some of the other extended release treatments, but at least a lot of the homemade treatments they don't seem to work particularly well. Now, I'm not the only one that has seen this. Again, I'm going to throw Lewis out here, like some of the work that Lewis Bartlett has done has also kind of supported that same thing. They did a big, larger study with like 129 colonies, and they tested a similar but different recipe that was like a homemade shop towel, like soaked OA with glycerin, and they also found no negative effects on Varroa with this. So really sticking to those other label products is probably better for you. And I know that's true. I have not personally ever tested aloe and cap. That's not something that I have done, but at the University of Auburn, or actually I think it's Auburn University, they're particular about that. there's a researcher named Dan Arell, who's a PhD student at the time of Jeff Williams, and he did test aloe cap. So basically, what they found and throughout that research is that it did drop varroa, and it was a little bit less than Apivar. However, I had a phone call with Dan about this before I came to this meeting because I wanted to make sure that I understood, because this work is not published yet, and I wanted to make sure I understood. And he gave me permission to share all this, but he said that they think that they applied below the recommended amount, or at least now that aloe cap is like recommending more strips per colony than they were doing. They were only using 2 strips per brood chamber, and I believe now that the recommendation, if you look at the label, will be more than that, about 4 strips. And they were running double deeps, and so they had 4 strips total per colony. And so they think that with a different application and maybe the proper application level, that it could be much more effective for them than what they were seeing. But they even still saw that it was still fairly effective. Now, you might look at that and say, like, if we're looking at that bar chart here, and you're seeing the percent efficacy and saying slightly over 50%, or like slightly under 75%, Cameron, that's dismal. And I swear I'm not trying to be like doom and gloom here, but like that's kind of the situation that we are at now in the United States, right? We have been really not responsible stewards with the chemical treatments that we have, right? And so we are at best, like, we're hoping for those like 70% effectiveness, which doesn't sound great, but that's kind of where we're at. So you're trying to get ahead of that and do much more, and you will have better efficacy, I promise, if you are rotating your chemical treatments in ways that we have not. So to kind of start to bring this to a close, I wanted to tell you a little bit about some of the current OA research that we are doing in our lab. And one of them is to kind of figure out what is that optimal temperature that we are seeking to vaporize OA. Because if I look into my old like chemistry textbooks and I look at like what does it say for like the combustion point is for oxalic acid is at about 189 degrees is when it breaks down into formic acid, carbon monoxide, and water. And if you look at like any like instructions with a vaporizer, they're almost always preset at about 230, and that's significantly more. Now, I know that 230 works, right? Like it does kill mites because those previous studies that we were using were at about 230. So I know that it does work, whether it's actually OA or if it's breakdown products of something else, it's killing mites. But could we optimize this by bringing that temperature down? So just, I don't have the data with me because we are still kind of collecting it and we're still figuring it out. Just anecdotally, from what I can tell you, is if we went down to like one of our treatment groups was at that like about 190 degrees, which is like right at that point, and that was not effective for vaporization. It's too low. It's not going to vaporize efficiently. It just kind of bubbled out and gooped out, and it didn't really work. Higher than that, 230, and we even did a 280 group. We really didn't see like noticeable differences, but we're going to go through and really do a deep dive and through with our statistics and get a better information on that. So there will be more information to come related to that. And then the Apabioxol, which is the company that owns the product, is called Chemicals Leif, which is out of Italy. We've had conversations with them and have tested a new product that they have in Europe. Which is basically, they call it Apabioxol RTU, which is like ready to use, which is just like a pre-formulated glycerin dribble. And so we have been using that, and anecdotally, I can tell you it's easy to apply, and it seemed to work particularly. It worked well, but I don't know yet if it is like working better than our other OA options, because we just finished this project on Friday of last week, so I don't have all that data and things together yet. But I'm hopeful that we will hopefully be able to provide some new information kind of related to mite treatments and particularly oxalic acid treatments. There's a group of us Lewis is part of this group, but there's about 6 different research institutions in the U.S. and even in Canada where we have come together to receive a decent-sized grant that's allowing all of us to work on some different aspects of new, like searching for new active ingredients and kind of refining OA. We feel excited that we'll have something new, and probably the most important part of this research that we got and part of this grant was that there was some USDA and EPA level of involvement that have allowed us to have like a fast track. So if we do find something, we have an ability to bring it to market a bit faster. So there's more to come. So if I'm just going to conclude because I know I'm about out of time here, but we have found that OA, dribble, and vapor at the current legal dose for you all can be effective. So it can be a useful product that, or useful treatment that is used in rotation. We found that there was no negative impacts to colony health at 4 grams. So that's a motivation for us to try to increase that level. And I think actually we are quite close to doing so in the U.S. It's even with all the tumult that's going around in the U.S. government right now, there's still a little bit of hope there that this is going to move forward relatively soon. If you are going to apply an oxalic acid treatment, it makes the most sense to give it 5 to 7 days. Give yourself enough time for those mites to kind of emerge out and before you reapply. And the last thing I'll say is I'm not a fan of a lot of the homemade treatments. I think this is something that you will want to stick to the label and be safe so that you don't hurt yourself or your bees. So if you're interested, I have so many wonderful lab members and crew that help us and work on these projects. And if you're interested, I've included a virtual tour on this lab. I know so many over the last few years, a lot of Australian beekeepers have come to the United States, kind of learn and work with Varroa and get some more training, which I believe is incredibly smart. So if you have the time and the means to be able to do so, you're welcome to come visit us in Florida. We'd be happy to have you and happy to work with you all. So I think that might be it for my time. But thank you. Appreciate it.